Last time we were here, we stopped off at you entering Holland. So we figured that's about getting closer to the end of the war, right?
Yes, it would be, yeah.
I'm trying to think, because I think that's probably where we should pick up, and then like to hear about how you and Grandma met.
Well, how Granny and I met?
Well, yeah, we talked about the war a lot.
It wasn't in Holland, I can tell you that.
I had a girlfriend in Holland. I got a picture from her.
Had a girlfriend in Holland.
He
Yeah.
did.
What was her name?
Annie.
Annie? Anne?
She sends us pictures of her and her grandkids now from Holland.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Oh, isn't that the one you guys went and visited when you guys were
Yeah.
over?
One of them.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And we just got pictures from England of Grandpa's, it'd be your cousins
Yeah, yeah.
in England, that, on the half-acre side, Granny's side.
Mhm.
And one's 94 and one's 88 and the other one's 84. And the 71-year-old one is going to look after the 88-year-old one. You know, doesn't
Young
seem
taking care of the
possible.
old
And then you take our grandma and grandpa, and then in today's paper, there's an article some man wrote
Mhm.
about Ted Holmes being a special pilot, and he was married to Peggy Holmes, the
Really?
broadcaster.
I thought Harry was married
Yeah,
to
well,
That's what
it's
I read.
wrong, but it
Oh.
was in the journal. This guy's written it all up.
Yeah, because he wasn't in the air either. He was in
No.
the 301st
This
Battalion.
guy had a plane and I don't know what, Molotov something or other. It's quite a write-up.
That's pretty cool, though.
Oh,
Well, yeah, we figured we
Uncle
could.
Harry was only a court reporter for all those years.
Yeah. Didn't Auntie Peggy have to teach him how to type and help him with all that?
Didn't what?
Didn't Auntie Peggy have to help him learn to type?
Yeah.
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 But you know something? The system that Harry had for shorthand, nobody in the world could read his shorthand.
Really?
Well, he made it all himself.
That's a good idea. So he's irreplaceable at that point.
And you know, the thing that I was marveling at, he had just a little mark, kind of a wiggly mark, for a whole sentence. I can't remember what the sentence was, that's beside the point. But it'd be a 4 or 5 word sentence, which is commonly used.
Yeah.
And he had this little wiggly thing that he could use and take up less space to put this whole sentence down. He just had a little wiggly mark that would do it.
It's kind of crazy.
He would take a cigarette package, open the package up so it was, you know, they're not that much, they're about that long and so wide.
Mm-hmm.
And he could record, he could write down a whole afternoon of conversation between X number of people on that piece of paper.
That's pretty amazing.
It was,
And they got little typewriters for it and stuff. You have to go to school for it.
yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But Grandpa was he leaving Holland when you were talking with him last time, or was he
I
still
don't think we
there?
reached the end of the war because we didn't talk about him separating the detachments or telling the detachments, but other than that,
Okay, because then he went on up to Groningen, was it?
Groningen.
And that's where you chased the Germans back out of
Yeah.
Holland into Germany.
oh, okay.
And we pulled in at the south side of Groningen, and the Germans were going out the northwest corner. And I think that's right, northwest or northeast, I'm not sure which. Northwest, right. And this girl would come up to my truck, and I just grabbed her and put her on and sat her on my seat beside me, and this was Anne. And she was my girlfriend in Holland the whole time I was over there.
It's amazing. How long were you over there for? Or in that area?
About, you know, I can't really
Well, it was
remember.
over 3 months because you were 3
yeah.
months getting them out from behind the Zuider Zee.
Yeah,
They had to go in, did Grandpa tell you that? They had to go in behind the Zuider Zee and let the Germans know that the war was over and they didn't believe them.
Yeah, it was where they started shooting at you guys, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I had the hood, the shield down, pardon me, for the windshield, and in the windshield is just a little slot, about a quarter of an inch wide, just so a bullet couldn't come through it. And I was in the truck, and I had the hood just over top of this dike. There's a dike there, like, you know, and I pulled up and stopped with the truck on that angle, and the Germans started firing at me, and the bullets were ricocheting off the Galder, and I had the hood covered down so you couldn't hit the radiator.
Yeah.
Had that all down, and the bullets were ricocheting off the steel, the 1/4 inch steel that was around me, and the captain was sitting beside me, and a couple of guys were in the back, and this one man was a German that was in the Canadian Army, and he had a bullhorn, and he was telling them that we're not going to shoot at you, the war is over, we want you to surrender, and then it quit. He said, we're not fooling, the war is over. And about 5 minutes later, a couple of them came out, and they just went past us to the free zone. And they just left their guns right where they were. And I guess they believed us, and they had no other reason to doubt us, I guess.
But it took quite a long time to get them all out. There was 3,000 behind there, and they didn't think there was very many.
Someone said there might be 200, and there was, I think it was 3,000.
Holy. That's good intel.
And we were the only ones that managed to get in that far enough to get them to surrender.
That's pretty amazing. And then where'd you go from there?
That was it. You know, I can't remember the name of that town. Not Del Sal. Del Sal was a bit further north. I can't remember what that was. There was a dike there, and running water in a dike, like, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the name of the dike either. No, as I say it. And we went over there after this was when we went over to Holland after the war was all over. And I was telling him where we were, and one of the guys that lived in that area, he said this is where the Germans were. I said no, they weren't. The Germans were on that side. Oh, he said that would be before your army came in and chased him out. But up until then, they were on that side of the river, and we went on their side and put the bridge across so that we could get our tanks and everything into there. And that was a night of you wouldn't believe. It was raining. They were shelling us, and we were trying to push this bridge across, which we did eventually. It took us 7 hours to get that bridge across the river, and it was pushed over by my truck. Mine was the only truck that had the power or the size to be able to push it across. Mine was a 10-wheeler, and I had the thing that the captain told me, not my captain, this was another captain. He said, you do not get out of that truck. You have to stay in that truck no matter what. So, okay, so I'll stay here. And the closest shell that landed was right at the corner of that house, corner of the room there. That's how close one came to hitting me. Came down, and I heard it coming, and I just held my breath, and it went into the mud, and boom, and nothing, if it had been on hard ground, I'd have been a goner. But it was on muddy ground, and it sunk down into the mud, and when it fired, when it blew up, it went up like this angle, instead of out this way.
That's pretty close.
Pardon?
That's pretty close.
Yeah, it was close enough.
And then when you were in the parade over there, didn't you go back and visit the spot where you put the bridge across?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that's on your video. I started watching that, and that's on the video. You guys actually took a video of where it was.
Yeah. and they took me onto the bridge that they put across,
The Dutch Army
the Dutch
put this
Army.
Bailey Bridge across.
They put the bridge across there in a matter of hours. No. Just minutes. Mind you, broad daylight, sun was shining, there wasn't any rain, and nobody was shooting at them. And they pushed it across. Now how they did that, they hooked in, this would be the bridge, and they had a hook up in the center of the bridge here, and they would just hook onto it, and then take off and go into the spot and push it into the other bridge, and there was a way of locking the two together, and they could do that in a matter of minutes, where we had to push a whole bridge. A bridge was put together, a Bailey Bridge was put all together, then there was rollers put down, and I pushed it across, and it took us 7 hours to get that bridge across.
Holy.
And we picnicked with a whole pile of Dutch people and Canadians too, on the other side when we went back.
Oh really?
Yeah, it was fun. And then we went up to the house where the Grandpa had come, like after the not after the war, but come through there, and the farmer owned the farmland that we were on, where this came and became quite friendly with him. She still writes to us. It's
Yeah.
funny, you know.
He just passed away here.
Well, a few years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and but it was sort of cute. They were farmers, and they all had big boats, like cabin cruisers, you know, instead of trailers and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Everybody along the river owned a boat, and they went away for their holidays on the river. You know, and on Sundays they load their kids up and go down the river.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of interesting
That
to
still
see
sounds
it
like
all.
fun.
Actually, there were dikes, not rivers.
Well,
Yeah.
down the river. It was up the river or down the river.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we've been back and saw quite a few spots.
Yeah.
So what was the moment like when you found out the wars were over? Actually, both of you should be able to answer that one. When you found out the war was over, what was it like?
Well, I was in Germany at the time, and I found out that the war was over, and there was a bell hanging in the church, and we would be about 12 miles into Germany at this time, and I can't remember the town. I knew it at the time, but I can't remember the name of it. And there was this church, and I was up on a wee bit of a hill looking down at the church. Well, more or less. It seemed like I was looking down at the church. And as soon as I heard the war was over, I just pulled my sten around and into that bell. And I had that bell just ringing. Oh, Lordy. The stupid damn things a person does when he's, you know, I don't know if there was any Germans around there at that time. If he thought I was shooting at him, I'd be in trouble. But no, there was nothing. That was the end of the war, and that was it. And you know what? I have a hard time explaining to you how welcoming that was to hear that war was over. It was just, I mean, up until then we were on our tender hooks, you might say, expecting to get shot at any moment. And mind you, it could still happen, but the German army they quit. They had enough. They were beat up. We beat them into the ground, actually. We had them on the run, and they were a beaten army. They were happy that the war was over too. And not only that, I think their thoughts were, if they couldn't stop us on Dutch ground, how in the hell are they going to stop us on German ground? And we'd just beat up and ruin their land and their houses and their towns, and they just quit.
And where were you, Grandma, when you heard the war was over?
I can't remember. Isn't that awful? I was too young. I would only be, what, 16? If I was that, maybe. I know that they had a big dance and up at the McWhirter's store out there, and we all went to it.
Yeah.
But the war, of course, to us didn't really mean that much here because we were
was-
just the same as we are now. We were fine, you know, we didn't.
It was kind of like the Iraq War was, just not, or is, where you just don't really even realize anything's
No,
going on over there.
You don't really, you know, I mean, it's a war, but you're young and you don't really
And
think
she
of it.
wasn't waiting for anybody that was over there to come back and
No.
claim her.
Yeah.
No, you just don't, I know my mum sent parcels and I know my grandmother knitted socks for the soldiers by the tons and
You heard the one about the
that's about all.
You heard the one about the mother that heard that her son had grown another foot, and she was just making up a parcel to send to him, and she put a pair of socks in it, so she knitted another sock.
That's too funny.
Because he'd grown a foot.
He'd grown another foot.
Terrible.
So did you guys have any other family that was in World War II at all?
Yeah, my uncle.
Yeah.
My uncle, Joe Holland.
Joe, yeah.
My Uncle Joe Holland was in the army over where Grandpa was. He wasn't in the fighting, but he was in England in the mechanics
In
part of
Whitley.
it.
In Whitley Camp.
Yeah.
Whitley
But
Camp.
that was in the Second World War.
Yeah.
And
My dad was in the First World War with Grandpa Kilford. My dad was in the engineers,
Yeah.
and he was in the First World War. But Uncle Joe, which was his brother, was in the Second World War. He was too young for the First World War.
And he was the sergeant major in this camp, and I can still hear him hollering. He was the most hated person. God.
Nobody really.
So you actually got to see him when he was over there? So you were with
No,
him?
I didn't.
You could just hear him.
Pardon me. Yeah, I saw him a couple of times, but I didn't let on to who I was or where I was from or anything.
I
I
have
think he knew where I was from.
two of my cousins were in the Navy, and one of them was in the Army. I don't think any of them were in the Air Force. Not that I'm aware of.
Not
They
that I'm
were, well, they were all pretty young, you know, our side of the family. And of course, Dad didn't have anybody else, but Uncle Douglas, your uncle, was in the First World War.
Yeah.
And he was something like quite high, mucky up in India.
Yeah.
But I don't know what. And,
He was. What the devil was he? He was in the. He was in this. He was. He wasn't a soldier. He was a engineer. Because he was doing that, using that boat to get the. I just forget what it was getting. Getting water from the river and getting the silt off the bottom of the river to so they could use the boats to get in and out of it. And I can't remember the name of the river right at the moment. It was in India.
so there was a few more in there,
Yeah.
but the rest were all too young. We didn't have any girls, I don't think, in it, period. Back then, there weren't, you know,
It wasn't too many.
There
of
wasn't
them,
as many,
except for nurses and stuff.
you know, there just wasn't the same category of people there. You know, we've heard them talk when we've been overseas, and they tell us that they have to, you know, when the bombs are coming, they all have to run and get into the
Bomb shelters.
bunkers or bomb shelters. And the funny things that happen, like we had a friend over there and she wrote my mom and she said, well, at least we can laugh, because she said the bombs were bombing all around us and we didn't dare go out and run in the street, so we all sat under the kitchen table, you know, hopes that it would be some help. Then she said, when we all sitting under the kitchen table, we looked out and everybody's legs were sticking out. You know, they were under, but their legs were out. And then she said we got the giggles and we all laughed so hard that if the Germans had come then, we couldn't have done anything anyway. But they did have a sense of humor, you know, to go through the war, some of them. But I always remember Mrs. Waller writing to Mom and telling her the problems that they had. And It wasn't easy, and then there was not half the food they needed. You know, they were all on ration tickets. You had a little ticket, and for a ticket you get so much sugar or butter or whatever it was. And there was no material for making wedding dresses or anything like that. They were making them out of anything they could get. Like if they were lucky enough to find a parachute that had gone astray and landed, they used it to make wedding gowns or for their wedding. Because you couldn't buy material. You couldn't buy a lot of things. It was hard. I know my mom used to pack tea and butter and what the heck else was there? 2 or 3, I think peanut butter even, and make a box and send it over to them. And nylon stockings, none of the women had nylon stockings because they didn't make them anymore. Everything went to the war. They thought that was a wonderful thing to get, was a pair of nylon stockings in a box. And out here, it didn't affect us at all. The sugar did. At one point, my mom we had to have a coupon, and like John would have a coupon and I'd have a coupon, and Mom and Dad. So like we'd have 4 coupons, and Mom could go and get sugar. But it wasn't for very long. Not like it was overseas. So. But they scrounged, like even to get potatoes, because the gardens were all blown up, or a lot of them were. They didn't have the vegetables and stuff over there. There's a lot of things behind the war that's harder on the people than actually the ones that were in the war, when you really stop to think of it.
Yeah, it was
we put on dances and had basket socials and luncheons and stuff to raise money for the Red Cross, and then they in turn were taking stuff over for the soldiers. I remember my dad said he got, in the First World War, my dad said he got warm, well knitted socks. It was the first ones he'd ever had since he'd been overseas. He said you wore what you had until they were worn right out.
Yeah.
They didn't have, you didn't have quite that. You did have supplies, didn't you?
Yeah.
But the First World War they sure didn't. But.
And I was a scrounger I was the cook in our group, and there was 5 men in my truck, and I was the scrounger. I'd go out and get different things so they'd have something to eat. And the one thing that I got a big box. Well, not a big box. It was about a 30-pounder, if I remember right, of hardtack. Now, a hardtack is a biscuit that is, to bite a piece of that off is just about impossible. You can, but it's damn hard to do. But it's lots of vitamins, a lot of food value in it, put it that way. And I got this gall-darn can, and my gall-darn crew just about kissed me when they found out I had this. They couldn't get over. I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't remember how I found it, but I got a hold of it somehow, and I had it in the truck. And anybody wanted something to eat, I give them a hardtack. It was 30. I'm sure it was 30 pounds. In a thing about this size around and about this high. And that was a hardtack. It was in there.
Pretty
and
amazing.
It was hardtack.
Probably use it to patch walls.
What's that?
So you could probably use it to patch walls.
Anyway, use it for blocks to put your truck up on.
Yeah.
Not quite.
Some of the things that happened in the army, you look at that. Now, for instance, I was at the front of my truck. I was doing something. I can't remember what it was. I was doing something, and the foxhole that we had built was at the back wheel of my truck, and I was at the front wheel on the left-hand side, and this thing was on the right-hand side at the back. And I had his name that's gone. It was his French name. And anyway, he was my sergeant. And he was at the back of the truck getting something out of the back. and he was on the ground. And I heard this shell coming. And I around the back and into that thing, and he landed on my back. And he said, when I jumped to go into that damn shell, you weren't there, and I landed on your back.
Just caught there right quick.
What the heck was his, Lazon?
It doesn't matter.
I can't think of his name. Sergeant Lazon, yeah, but I can't think of his first name. We was, when you get together like that, in a group, your corporals and your sergeants, even the captains get called by their first name, and there's never any argument about it.
It's because you don't want to single them out as a target, right?
Well, not, yeah, that might
You
be.
don't want to salute them or whatever.
But Bill Salter, or other, for instance, he demanded that I call him Bill. He said, don't you call me Mr. Salter, Bill. And I said, well, I'm Bill, that doesn't matter. He said, that's what I want you to call me. Yeah. Yeah.
Wars are funny things, like Grandpa and I were just saying the other night about, this gal that writes, they lived in it, and so did Garrett Hom, the where we stayed in Holland, the house that hosted us. He was only 12 years old, and the Germans took over his mother's house. She was a widow, and she had to cook and do everything for them. And there was no food for the kids. There was him and his sister, and his mom had to scavenge whatever she could find for them because they weren't included in the menu when the soldiers were eating. And he was given money to go and find cigarettes and all this sort of stuff for these guys, for the German soldiers. He literally hated them. Like as he said, they treated the people just terrible. And he literally hated them. Even after the war, he still didn't like to mention it, and he was quite irate about it. But for a 12-year-old, it was just unbelievable. Like he would go and get cigarettes for the guys, and then they'd give him a tip, and then that's what he saved up and managed to buy food for his mother so that she could eat. It's hard to believe that men can be that miserable when there's kids around, but when it's war, they do things differently, I guess.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, because they ate the tulip bulbs over there. People took the tulip bulbs right out of the ground and boiled them and ate them because they ran out of supplies. And when you hear people that actually tell you they did this, it's really scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and they survived, so I guess they did all right.
And our host and hostess, they died within.
Yeah, just a few months of each
Yeah.
other. Yeah. And,
He died of, I can't remember.
he died of diabetes.
Diabetes?
Yeah.
And she died of,
Pneumonia.
right.
But as I said, when he told you about this story, it wasn't a story. It was such an actual fact that it was scary to think, well, we hope it doesn't ever happen in our country. And we've been lucky so far, but you never know. And I think Grandpa told you we were over here one night after badminton with a group.
I remember you
That we
telling me,
played-
but I don't think we recorded it.
Pardon?
I remember you telling me, but I don't think
Yeah.
we recorded it, because that was funny.
Yeah, well, we played badminton with a bunch of people, and this one couple invited us to come back to their house. And there was 6 of them, and Dad and I. And when we got back, we were all sitting around talking, and the guys were talking about these nifty-looking gals and
In Italy?
in Italy and blah, 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 blah. And Dad said all of a sudden the back of his neck felt the hair was raising on it, because he realized they were in the German army and he was in the Canadian army.
And I
And they
was
were
only
talking
one.
exactly the same way, about what the country was like and what they were doing and everything. They were the same kind of guys, And what did you say to him?
There was one, I said, I just now realized that you fellas were in the German army and I was in the Canadian. Oh yeah, he said, we knew that. Yeah, we knew that.
But it hadn't it hadn't affected Grandpa that way until he suddenly realized that they were exactly the same kind of guys that had been
And
sent to war.
I was relating one little town that I knew the name of it then, but I can't remember it now. This town was built on a hill, and we were on the west, well, yeah, more or less the west side of the hill, and the Germans were on the east side, but further away, quite away. And they were trying to bomb this town that we were in, and this particular street that we were on, and they were throwing shells over, but they were just a little bit on the long side. If they went a little short, you see they hit the top of the hill, and if they went a little bit further, they went down the valley, and they were landing down in the bottom. And this hill was quite steep like this, and there was a couple of roadways in it, a couple of houses in it, and we were in one of the houses up there that had the corner been knocked off by our shell, but nothing while we were there. And the Germans were firing at us, but they weren't hitting us. And I was telling him about this particular town, but I said I knew the name then, but I can't retain it now. Anyway, and they said, the Germans said, oh yeah, he said, that we remember firing at that town, and we couldn't hit it because it was over the mountain, over the edge of the mountain. If you shot a little bit low, it would hit the top. If you shot a little longer, it'd go down over the valley. And that's what was happening. And we were quite happy about that.
That's gotta be a little weird to stand and look in the face of somebody who may have been actually firing at you on the other side.
They said that he was the one that I knew quite well. I can't think of his name right now.
Horst.
Yeah, Horst. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was in the artillery, and he said he remembers that town.
So he actually was the one firing at
He
you.
was probably shooting at you.
That's pretty amazing. That guy must have been big to be in artillery.
Yeah. And I was in artillery, but mine was in anti-tank.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, I wasn't in Italy that you shot a hole through the wine vat?
Yeah.
That's what I thought, and then they all got to drink.
Yeah, they flooded
They
their
plugged it
campsite.
up so it
didn't they?
couldn't run out.
Plugged it with a bullet.
Plug it with a bullet.
Yeah.
And the last guy that went and got a liter of wine out of there forgot to put the bullet back in. And we had a blinking floor covered with damn vino. Wine.
But you had fun.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is that their training, they had so little training. You know, they really, nothing I don't think in warfare, did you?
Not really. We had training as how to use the gun, and thank heavens we didn't actually have to use it to defend ourselves. Most of the time we came along after the war was the fighting was over, and we didn't have to do any of that. We were quite lucky in that. Yeah, the anti-tank was there in case the tanks came over the front line and came back. We were lined up with our guns ready to try and stop them. And the thing is, we couldn't aim at the tank, we had to aim at the the tracks of the tank, because our bullets would just ricochet off these damn big tanks. They had 11 inches of steel in the front of them.
Holy cow.
And our gun wouldn't even warm that up by hitting it. Well, I guess it would, but
But if you could break the track,
the shell hits the track and it just knocks the track off.
Yeah.
And they're immobile. Mind you, their gun still operates. They can turn the turret and use the gun, but we weren't thinking about that. We were just stopping the tank coming.
yeah.
And you try to hit the tank too if you can, right where the turret meets the body.
Yeah, 'cause that's a space in between, right?
Pardon me?
There's a space in between, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And if you hit that with an explosive shell, you do a lot of damage to the tank. even the biggest tank. But you know, when I tell you about some of these tanks that the Germans had, I'm sorry I can't relate or can't tell you the tonnage because I can't remember that. 80 tons, there's something like that. I know they're monsters. But I had a picture taken of me leaning up with my elbows like this on the tank was laying over on its side. And the whole bottom was, and the top tracks would be as high as this ceiling, the bottom side of them. So you get an idea of the size of the track.
That's pretty amazing.
And the track at the bottom was at least 4 feet high, and I had my elbows up on the thing when they took a picture of me. Just you know, just to give you an idea of the size of the tank. They're humongous bloody things.
It's gonna be a little scary to see coming driving towards you.
What's that?
So it's gotta be a little scary to see coming driving towards you, though.
Right. And you only got to go around the pea shooter.
Yeah. Might as well have a pellet gun, yeah, no way you go.
Yeah. And,
Yeah, that's for sure.
the one of the things that we heard, this was just a off the cuff kind of a thing. They said if all the tanks that the Germans had made had got to the front line, we would have had a hell of a time winning that war. But apparently 40% of them lost power, lost mobility rather, because the tank was so goddamn heavy. The transmission would blow up. They get down in deep mud and trying to make time to get from A to B, and they just the transmission would blow up. Then they're sitting there with nothing. They can't go anywhere.
Pretty amazing.
And they had a tank. They had a gun on board that was bigger than our biggest anti-tank gun. Ours was 17 pounders, and theirs was 18 pounders, and a lot more power in their
Motors.
yeah,
Really?
no, in
The
the
gun?
explosion for the
Oh.
shell. It would travel, I just forget now, the footage per second, and it was just beyond belief. Yeah, and I've seen some things that make your stomach just turn. We saw a Sherman tank sitting out in the field, and I kind of wished in a way that I hadn't climbed up on top of it to look down through the top turret, but we did, 2 of us, and that was all the rest of Bucks and I. We jumped
Oh,
up on
what's
this.
the matter? Oh,
We jumped up on this tank, and I looked down in there, and I just about lost it. 2 men sitting there in the front seat, and the shell had come through the tank from the one side and gone out the other, but so new went through their necks right here, and their heads were laying back over on the back of the seat.
hello.
That's pretty amazing. That's one that's a million shot, too.
But that shell had come in the tank, gone through their necks, and out the other side.
Here.
And the tank
Oh, you've been
well, it
outside on the back
just
porch.
about burned up, but
Yeah.
not quite.
Your ears are cold. Yes,
Yeah, you
yeah.
must have seen some pretty crazy stuff over there. Like, we watch movies with that kind of stuff in it, but it's nothing like it in real life.
No.
You know, if anybody thinks that wars are all glory, you might say, they ain't. They're terrible. You know, the thing is, this one thing that bothers me, they say there's a God somewhere. Well, if there is a God, what's he letting them do this to everybody? Everybody trying to kill each other. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, apparently it's man against man. It's nothing,
God.
And you've got to fight for your own safety lots of times and do things you wouldn't normally do
Kill or
to
be,
save your life in a
kill or
war.
be killed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
you
about
do.
the long- That's about
If
the
you
longest.
stop for a minute to think about helping the other guy and he shoots you beforehand, it's too
Yeah.
late.
Yeah.
You know, it's, yeah.
I would sooner be a live coward than a dead hero.
Very well said. That's true.
Well, when you
You
think
can live
of
to be a hero
Grandpa,
another day.
when you think of the differences between the two wars even, you know, in Grandpa's war, they were in ice cold, mucky
Trenches,
trenches and that's what Grandpa got those bad legs from because they swelled up in the war there. And, you know,
that's
the food was minimal. There, lots
That's-
of times they didn't have anything, period.
my dad, not me.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
My dad was never in that. He was just in the engineering side of it. But and like when Dad was in there, well, they had supplies and meals, and you were never hungry.
No,
You know, there's quite a difference between the two wars. And
it's
then,
because I stuck those damn hardtack, that's why.
no, but you know, there was a lot more. There was kitchen canteens and everything all set up, eh?
Yeah.
Whereas the First World War, it was just unbelievable how they survived.
The sergeant, the captain of our group, Bill Salter, came to me one day as we were getting into camp for the night. He says, "Bill, will you go and give Cookie a hand, get supper ready?" I said, "Okay." So away I went, and I went there, and Cookie was, I can't think of his name, doesn't matter, but he said,
Yeah. Dropping off flyers.
Flyers.
And he said, "Get that can open over there, Bill, and dump it into that boiling hot water." So I did. And this is the honest to God's truth. These squares were about 1.25 inches, approximately 1.25 inches by 1.25 inches squares. And one square floated to the top, and I picked it off. It was nothing but gall down sheep wool. Honest, that's the truth.
It was sheep that they were eating, or lamb. But whoever cut it
You
up
know.
and cut the hair into it as well.
I think what they did, they run a sheep head first through that damn machine and cut it into squares.
Just use it
know
as
that.
filler.
Pardon?
Just use it as filler.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll fill you up.
This is honest. There was 2 or 3 pieces that were nothing but wool. Like my mother said about food sometimes, what doesn't fatten will fill.
Very true.
Yeah. Well, about 3 months after the war was over, you were home,
Yeah,
That didn't take long.
wasn't it? I
about
think.
that.
1946? 45?
45 more.
45, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was back home. And, you
What's
know,
the first thing you did when you landed
Where?
here in Canada? The first thing right after the war.
You got into the train.
And then?
And we went 24 hours a day. The train never stopped. Pardon me, it did occasionally stop to. What did that
fuel
do?
up.
No, what the heck was it stopping to pick up? It didn't pick up water. I picked up water on the fly. Coal for these steamers.
Mm.
They had to stop and get coal. That's the only thing they stopped for. The rest of the time they were just a 60-mile-an-hour plus with that steamer.
That's pretty amazing. I don't even know half of our trains can
From
do
New
that.
York, from New York all the way to Edmonton,
Holy cow.
In
February.
I can't remember. We arrived in Edmonton on the 28th of February, and I think it was a 4-day or 3-day, pardon me, 3 days from Halifax to Edmonton. That train was just a whistling.
It's pretty amazing. It's like a 6-day drive.
And the only reason we knew what the speed was, at every crossing that we went by, any road that was traveling at right angles from us to the south or whatever window we were looking out, we counted the minutes between, and every time it was a minute between these miles, we knew that was 60 miles an hour.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And who greeted you when you got here?
I guess I went into Edmonton and I stayed at Uncle.
Tom
No,
Parsons?
Parson, right?
Okay.
What the hell was his name? Uncle Ole? No.
I don't think your mom and dad were at the train when you
No,
came, were they?
no, they weren't. And
It's a long way from Lumen to Edmonton.
No doubt.
And I came home, I phoned, or, do you know, I don't really remember. I know Mum was quite happy to see me. And you know, I sent a letter home and it said on the outside of the letter, for Grandpa, for Mr. Kilford only. And I was explaining what the war was like. Well, guess who? Granny opened it up. And I guess he was sick. I was telling her I was in the front line and expect the worst at any time. And that it was. I was damn lucky to get out of there. The first night in action, a damn Jeep that I was riding in, just a few minutes before this thing blew up, I was hanging on the rail over the back of the Jeep with my belly on these shells and my hands hanging onto the side to keep these shells in there so we could get them down to the gun. And we went down to the gun, unloaded the shells, turned around and started going back up. And the sergeant looked back at me and said, Bill, Kilford rather, they didn't call me Bill. Kilford, can you see where the road is? I said, just a little bit to the right. And as he turned a little bit to the right, hit a mine. And I came back, I was about the length of this room. No, I don't know exactly how far. I was maybe just about the length of this room. From the Jeep, laying in the mud, with my helmet laying about 3 feet further on. So I grabbed my hat, put my helmet on, my hair was all mud, and I went back to the Jeep. Here it was laying on its side, smoke coming out of it. And the corporal that beat me to the front seat, I saw him laying underneath the Jeep, so I went to pull him out and I grabbed a hold of his those buttoned over pieces of thing that keep your straps on your
The satchel part? Yeah.
Pardon?
The satchel part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I pulled them off in my hands, trying to pull him out. Anyway, I got a hold of his arm and pulled him out. He had a piece of shrapnel went through his wrist. So that he was immobile. And the sergeant, he had his leg broken in 2 places, his left leg in 2 places. And we carried him, I think it's about a mile and a half or thereabouts, maybe a half a mile, I don't know. And the thing that I couldn't get over, 2 guys were carrying his feet and I was carrying his top end.
Doesn't seem really fair.
That's how smart I was. I said I'm smartened up.
Pretty amazing though.
We had a young fellow named Bill Sylvester. He came out from England with his mom, and his mom was a dressmaker, and she worked in Edmonton, and Bill stayed with my grandparents on the farm when he was a little boy. And then he went overseas in the war, but he was getting soldiers out, wasn't he?
He was a Red Cross.
Yeah, he worked more with the Red Cross, bringing out the wounded, and he had a book with all the names and the numbers of the men that he bought out. And we were down there one day and talking with him, and Dad happened to say something, well, I lost a buddy of mine, Cyril Peck, in Italy, in Sicily somewhere, and he said, just a minute, and away he went and he came back with the book, and he had actually bought Cyril out. It was
And he had belly wounds.
Yeah.
Really?
That's all he knew. He had belly wounds.
Yeah.
And so
It's funny, you know, that was long after the war.
That's pretty
was
amazing
over.
though.
But,
yeah.
and so then he came back and went to work and got married in 1950.
1950.
Gosh, if he'd known that, he'd have stayed in the war.
We've been fighting ever since.
Well, you guys met at a dance, right?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah,
that?
You guys met at a dance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A monistic.
Yeah.
We went to the
I
dance.
said to Jack Peck, that's the next girl I'm gonna go with. Jack says, you haven't got a hope in hell. So I went up and danced with her. And she must have liked it.
Apparently. Or she didn't know any better.
I was so green.
Was that it?
I was so green. Well, I was
Yeah.
going to school. I was still in high school, and Dad worked for a while on the farm, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then you went into Edmonton and worked for. You were a cab driver for a long time there,
2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
And then he went to work for the liquor vendors. Worked at the
That
liquor
was
vendors
a
for
much better job.
a couple of 3
I
years.
didn't have so far to go to get the booze.
And I'll tell you, when he came home from the liquor vendors, I always knew whether he was drunk or not. Like if they have their parties, you know, and he'd be going. But if he was drunk, he hung up all his clothes. And if he wasn't drunk, he just dumped them on the floor.
Oh,
Guilty conscience had to make up for it. That's
Right.
the way.
yeah.
Oh, we had a house on the south side there, a little house that we lived in, and when we were first married, we had our party. I think it was for our first wedding anniversary, and it had snowed. It was really miserable, and anyway, we had this party, and the gang were all there. You had to go out to a biffy outside, so Auntie Rhodey went out with the girls, and she had to go so bad she couldn't wait for the other girls to go ahead of her, so she went around the corner and was just going to go in the trees, and she fell into another hole that had been dug ready
For
to
the,
move the old-fashioned toilet. You know, that's what they did with them, and she
And
fell
she's-
in.
and she sat down in it.
So anyway, she came into the house and she was a mess, and so we got her all changed and gave her some of my clothes, and she went out and
Ralph and I
Uncle
went,
Ralph.
Ralph and I went to get something. I can't
No, I
remember.
can't remember what she'd
More
got.
likely booze.
And when he came in and he said, "How come you got those clothes on her?" She said, "Oh, I went shopping while you were out." But we still always laughed about her falling in the outhouse. Oh, we had some crazy times like you guys too, you know.
Oh, yeah.
We have a good laugh if nothing else, eh? Yeah, oh well. But we had good times back then, but nowhere near like the times you know, there wasn't the money back then.
Yeah.
Nobody had money. And our big days were Saturday night dances, and they didn't cost you very much to go, and they supplied cake and sandwiches for whatever you paid. I don't think it was $1. And then at midnight you'd always have coffee and cake or something, and then Sundays everybody played ball back then, and we all went to Lakeview where the big diamond was, and then the little kids went swimming, and the gals sat and watched the guys play softball. That was our big entertainment pretty well. Yeah. Didn't go too far afield in those days, I'm telling you.
We were having a party in Italy, I guess this was, and I had just got this sergeant to be my sergeant. See, there's a sergeant in charge of the truck, and then there's the group that are in it, driver and whatever, all the rest are gunners that they can use, fire the big 6-pounder gun. Anyway, we were having this party, and I wasn't drinking that much, but I had drank enough. Anyway, Sergeant Elliott was my new sergeant, and he came over to me, he says, "Give me the keys to the truck, I'm gonna go down and get some more booze." I says, "You're not taking the truck anywhere." He said, "I'm the boss here, and don't you do as you're told." I said, "Well, you're not taking the damn truck, just forget about it." And he took a swing at me, and I put my hand up, my arm up, and he hit me right on the end of the elbow and broke his hand. God, was he ever, well, he went to the hospital because of it. He had to have his hand operated on and put back into pieces, I guess. But that was as long as he was my sergeant. Not very long. Yeah, he was all hell bent that you're gonna do as you're told. I said, well, you're not driving the truck, I can tell you that right now. That's the end of the conversation. And he took a swing at me and broke his hand.
Yeah. So, well, they used to have a lot of fights, and it used to, at the different halls that you went to, that somebody would get drunk, and then he was gonna, you know, beat you up. And there was a group of them, like, Dave Atkinson would be the one, he was big, and he was be the one that was in front, but then Dad would be the one that was watching his back, you know, so that nobody came along and slugged him from behind.
And this one time that I can remember very plainly, Dave Atkinson was having a bit of an argument with this particular Frenchman from Beaumont. And he was going to show him a thing or two, but he said, Kilford, look after my back. It's okay, so I walked around behind him. And Dave landed one punch, hit this guy full in the mouth, and there was a car, there was in between two cars that all this happened. And he fell backwards, and he caught his leg in the bumper part, you know, the thing, and he fell over and broke his leg. God almighty, I can still remember him howling. He was in agony. And his leg was up in this damn bumper.
Yeah.
That's-
And like years
That's
ago, I
scary.
can't remember hearing of anybody that shot anybody. You know, it didn't happen back in our day and age. There was people shot, but it was by accident. Like I had a cousin that was killed, and his brother and him had gone and bought a new gun. It was supposed to be empty, and kids swung around and, you know, said stick him up or something to Jack, and pulled the trigger and bang, it killed him. There was a shell in it. And, you know, but that was all you ever heard of. Like, there was never, well, in all the years that we lived out at Fultonville, I never heard of anybody that had ever been even beaten up hardly. You know, it was a different world than we have nowadays.
Is it yours?
Yeah.
Oh, yours?